Welcome to the Big Rethink Interview series. Today, we're very excited to be interviewing a scholar who focuses on Latinx serving institutions and Latinx populations in higher education, Professor Gina Garcia. I'm Bryan Alexander. I'm faculty in the LDT program, and I'll be moderating our discussion. We also have John Clark, who is a master's student in the LDT program. John, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm John Clark, and as Bryan said, a student in the master's program in Learning Design Technology at Georgetown University, and I've been kind of helping out with this Big Rethink program as a number of our other students are.
And we really appreciate it. Thank you. Professor Garcia, we're going to have a whole webpage introducing you. When I was thinking of how to introduce you, I asked you about your classes you're teaching this fall. So you're teaching one on the history of higher education and another one on social justice, which tells us a lot about your current background. One thing I guess I should ask is, what are the big ideas or big topics that you're thinking about this summer?
Well, I mean, I think big topics are aligned with what pretty much we're all seeing in the world. COVID-19, how do we respond? How do we get through this pandemic when we don't seem to have proper leadership at the federal level? And at least in my opinion, we don't have proper leadership. And so that's making it hard to even for us to get through this. So yeah, COVID-19 is definitely top of my mind. Particularly, I'm a parent, so that seems to be what's trending on even CNN the last couple of days. Is like, are our kids going back to school? While simultaneously, faculty are thinking, are we going back to campus? So yeah, how are we gonna function for the next year, despite this pandemic that we're going through, is on my mind nonstop, as it is for many of us. And obviously the uprising, racial uprisings that aren't new, and it isn't new. Racism isn't new. Anti-Blackness isn't new. Activism isn't new. It just has been, I think, almost simultaneously, those two things are working together. I think the fact that we were all sheltering in place when we watched the killing of George Floyd, that it just allowed us to our consciousness to sort of elevate, collectively, which is an amazing thing for somebody like me who does a lot of work around social justice and racial justice, to see the country sort of awaken at the same time. And then many people are not awakening, but new folks who I have never seen consciously awaken before, to become woke. The term is woke, and a lot of people are woke, or a lot more woke than they were a couple months ago. So those of course are the big things on many of our minds, and that's what's on my mind. And it's really on my mind how I'm going to move forward for the academic year.
Well, thank you. And thank you again for agreeing to talk with us, because that's going to help, I think, all of us move forward. So you're paying careful attention to the pandemic and to the anti-racist movement. What are you seeing in terms of how these play out in higher education? I mean, as you look at the landscape of higher ed, both at your institution and beyond, what are some of the changes you see in the landscape, if any?
Right. Well, I think in the landscape, when it comes to COVID-19 and the pandemic that we're all experiencing, a whole lot of trying to figure out what this looks like to continue to operate as universities, colleges and universities, despite the fact that most of us aren't on campus anymore, right? We're all in our homes. We're all very much, distancing ourselves from those. A university is probably one of many places that we don't want to be when there's a pandemic, because there's thousands and thousands of people all together in very close quarters. So I think that's really where we're at, is the landscape is changing. It's like, how are we going to do this? But also, I guess maybe I'm just hopeful, and I am an eternal optimist. The response has been dramatic, right? That we have somehow just taken this just leap of faith and we're all like, we can do this. We can do this online and we can learn to teach differently and we can learn from it. And I've never wanted to teach online. I'm like, no, I want to be in person. I'm definitely I'm a people person. I want to be in presence with people. I'm a hugger. I want to touch people, right? There's something really important about social, people interaction, human interaction. And it was not anything I ever wanted to do was just be locked up in my house and working from my house nonstop all by myself. But we're doing it, right? And we're challenging ourselves to think differently. The resources I think have been phenomenal. There's so many resources and learning communities, and including, I tuned into your high flex, your panel discussion on high flex model, because it's like we're seeing all these new terms and new things coming on, and I'm like, well, what is it? I don't know what a high flex model is. I can kind of guess, but how do I do it, right? And so we're seeing people just responding and providing resources for us. There's resources everywhere. It's almost like an overload of resources. So I think that's amazing, as I can't say, at least from my perspective, that we haven't been provided with resources. My campus is amazing. My campus is providing tons of resources, although I recognize I'm at a well-resourced institution. And because I study institutions and inequalities across institutions, I know that's not the case everywhere. But I'm at a well-researched institution where they're like, what do you need? You need someone to help you design your course? We can meet with you tomorrow. That literally happened to me with, in designing my history of higher ed course. Like, tomorrow? Does tomorrow work? I'm like, sure, let's do it. And so the response and the resources, I think, are just amazing. And so we're at a moment, I think, where we can figure out, like, what does this look like? And we can do this, right? I'm hopeful.
That's great. Thank you. I really appreciate your optimism and definitely your energy on this. I hear you about resources. I just got sent another anti-racist reading list, and I realized I've lost track of how many of these I've seen. There's some.
Yeah.
Well, let's zero in a bit on these landscape observations, and let me ask on a kind of more of a quantitative sense, almost. What are the major trends that you're tracking, and what are some of the metrics that you're looking at when you're trying to analyze and understand the differences between institutions, as you mentioned before, or about what kind of dramatic responses colleges and universities offer?
Right. So me as a researcher and the kind of research I do, my work has always been about racial justice. And it's been particularly for the Latinx community, right? Because I study Hispanic serving institutions. That's the big population. Although I have argued for quite some time that because the HSI designation is racially driven, that the only reason you're in HSI and the only reason you're eligible for federal funding is because of the population of students who are racial, ethnically diverse, right? Minoritized populations. And so therefore we can center race when we think about HSI work and the way an institution comes to better serve students. And so I've always been able to bring race into the conversation, and people buy it, right? They go along with it. They're like, sure, we can talk about race. Because it's time, it's that moment. What for me and my own work, what I'm starting to the next level, because of what we're seeing with the rise of anti-racism, the talk around anti-Blackness, is that can be the next level of race talk, right? That people are now ready to understand that. Right? Had I said anti-Blackness like maybe 6 months ago in a talk, a lot of people wouldn't know what that meant. I don't even know that I fully understood what that meant, and was still trying to figure that out. Like, what's the difference between anti-Blackness versus racism, right? Like between white supremacy, right? White supremacy, there's all these different terms we have, and we're figuring out what all those terms mean in different ways. And so I think we're just at a level to like, we're ready to take it to the next level. We're ready to have more specific conversations. In my own work, I've been thinking a lot about anti-Blackness even in my own work. Have I centered Blackness? Have I thought about Black students really intentionally at HSIs? And I think it's just a moment that now, I mean, I just wrote a consulting report for an institution, and I said, what are your Black graduation rates? If you're not paying attention to them, I don't care if it's 2% of your population, you have to be concerned with your Black students. Otherwise, all your your Black Lives Matter posters, you know, because institutions are quick to be like with their statements about Black Lives Matter and we're committed to racial justice. And I'm like, okay, the next step is to actually, what does that look like? Right? What does that look like in practice? Are you disaggregating your data? Are you really centering your Black students? Are you really starting to think about how are we teaching anti-racism in the institution? So I think it's just given us a moment where we can actually elevate those conversations and people are willing to have them more than maybe even 6 months ago.
That's a big change. That's a big change. So there's a kind of leveling up from talking about racism to white supremacy to anti-Blackness. And then one metric to follow is Black student graduation rates.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, in my own metrics, graduation rates, people always want to look at graduation rates, but I also argue strongly that that can't be the only measure, right? And right now, one of the big ones is like, are you assessing your climate, right? Are you assessing your climate? Are you assessing whether or not you have a good number, an equitable number of Black faculty, Black graduate students, Black administrators, right? And not just Black, because when we get to those levels of faculty, graduate students, administrators, boards of trustees, they're very white. And we know that at a national level across institutions. So people of color, right? In general, across all of those entities, right? So we're just able to like put a spotlight on it, I think, a little more, which I think is, again, I'm an optimist. So I think this is great. What a great moment for us to start to really understand beyond your statement that Black Lives Matter, because I mean, we've seen so many statements. What do you do? Right? What do you do? How are you assessing whether or not Black Lives Matter on your campus? And how do you move forward with actually making sure you're centering those initiatives and those voices and those folks on your campus?
That's terrific. Thank you. I love the way you expanded on that. John, you were going to ask a question, I think.
So Dr. Garcia, I was going to ask a question about, very timely, your social justice class that you're teaching, and as you're talking about a more receptive audience, a broader audience, people who are more involved, and certainly people more engaged and aware. Are you looking for opportunities to kind of expand your teachings and how far you go within the class, and maybe you're still thinking through that this summer, but and things that can carry over into your university environment to take advantage of the situation, if you will, to recenter your campus?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the way I'm thinking about it is it's actually bringing, I would say, these two big major things going on at the same time together. So when I think about how do I expand my own teaching and how do I expand the way I'm teaching these topics, racial justice topics, in the current environment where I'm going to be teaching online and continuing to social distance, not be present with people, it's a great opportunity to think through that, right? Like, so what does it look like to teach virtually and to do asynchronous stuff and also bring that stuff in, right? So I started thinking about students recording videos, right? Rather than writing a paper. I'm like, okay, we're gonna do a video. For example, my history of higher ed class, I'm gonna have students record 2-minute revisionist history videos. I've never done it before, but I've had them read revisionist history. I've also added 2 more revisionist history books to the course. I'm like, you don't get 1, you get 3. And they're not even higher ed books. They're just revisionist history, just so they can think about how do you think critically about history, even if it's not the history of higher ed, how do you think about it? And I found, some examples of folks just doing fun videos, which for a population of master's students that are in their, early to mid 20s, social media is life to them, for many of them, right? And doing those sort of things is, so it kind of just goes along, right? I'm thinking about them simultaneously, right? How do I make this more fun and more effective and not just in this traditional, way of like, read the book and write a discussion post, right? And I'm like, it's not as fun, right? No, read the book and create a video, right? And here's a couple of examples how you create this revisionist history video, and then you can post it on social media too, if you want, right? You can submit it for the class and then post it. So I'm thinking about them together, right? That like, what an opportunity to think differently about my teaching, and also to think differently about how can I continue to do racial justice work in the classroom.
Thank you.
Great question, John. Thank you, Professor Garcia. We both want to take this class right now. I mean, just want to let you know that.
I mean, it's online, you know, you can.
Well, we're ready. We're excited. I'm also, I want to be careful of your time, and I want to make sure that we get to give you a chance to address all these other questions. But this is great. Let me zoom out from the question of the individual class now to longer term change. And let me ask two questions about that. The first is, what kind of changes do you anticipate in the long term, either to your university or to the overall higher education ecosystem?
Yeah. So this is where I will remain hopeful, but I think it's yet to be seen, right? I keep, I guess the optimist in me thinks, okay, it's time for us to make change in the way we deliver instruction and the way we do anti-racist work in the university. And then the other side of me is like, so when is it going to be something new tomorrow, right? When are we going to not stop caring about this and we're going to start refocusing on, or focus on something new? And so I guess I go back and forth with how optimistic I am. But I'm hopeful and want long-term change at the university. I write about long-term change at universities. I write about structural change and what structural change will look like. And because I know that structural change is going to take time, that's where I get sort of worried that we're going to fall back into our old ways if we don't stay diligent, right? If we don't keep pushing each other to continue to do this work well long after 2020, right? Like this has got to go on. Like this has got to be our new normal, right? To use that term, new normal, that we have to be constantly doing anti-racist work in colleges and universities, which means deconstructing a lot of what we do. Right? We've got to redo a lot of things. I mentioned board of trustees, right? We don't talk much about board of trustees when it comes to diversity work. And that's where my current research project is at. And so it's on my mind a lot, is like, what if your board of trustees aren't committed to anti-racist work, right? Or what if your board of trustees aren't committed to, you know, for my own work, Hispanic serving institutions, or being a Hispanic serving institution, you might not change all that much, right? And even when I think about external influences, I think about the federal government. The federal government's going to have to be on board with this work eventually. I say eventually because I don't think they are now. Accreditation boards, right? When is it going to be a part of the accreditation process to be doing anti-racist work? Not diversity and inclusion work. Not that, like, you know, those coded terms we use about multiculturalism or internationalism or whatever it may be, but like, no, are you doing anti-racist work or not? Because it's going to be in the accreditation process. And so I think that until all those external influences are doing it, then they're not going to, you know, it's not going to happen. So yeah, I'm hopeful, but also we got to stay diligent in this. And it's much bigger than just the small micro things we're focusing on now. It's got to be macro level.
Well, that's a great answer, and that slides beautifully into the next part of that question, which was, how do you see this work, this potential organizational structural change? How do you see that intersecting with some of the other equally massive trends, such as, say, climate change, such as globalization, or such as economic inequality? How
do I see those things coming in also?
Yeah. How do you see those
as part of this change process? So there's something about, I mean, and this connects back to the fact that I'm thinking about this history of higher ed and how we got to where we are. So I like teaching the history of higher education course, because basically what I take my students through is this, you know, 15 weeks to get to the point where we say, after 400 years, we haven't transformed much. We've actually just solidified what really came into play. I mean, if we think about the modern university, early 20th century, right? Like the early 1900s is when we start to really see the modern university coming and taking place, right? Where the research university gets solidified, community colleges come in, comprehensive universities take their place, right? Like, and the structure of higher ed, the big field of higher ed sort of gets solidified. And not much has changed as far as what we value and what we do, yet colleges and universities are supposed to be at the forefront of new ideas, right? We're the ones creating new knowledge. We're the ones, I mean, who's going to come up with a vaccine for COVID-19? I'm cheering for the university researchers, right? Like that's because that's what we do, right? We come up with vaccines. We come up with solutions to slow the effects of like climate change, the negative effects of climate change, right? We come up with solutions. We're the big thinkers, right? Of the world, really, and people look to us. So why aren't we the ones that like are leading the way of thinking innovatively and outside the box, right? And I think that we need to be thinking, how do all of these things, anti-racist work, being committed to climate change and positively addressing climate change, that we need to be the ones. Right, the colleges and universities needs to be the one, and we can't keep doing it the same way we've been doing it since 1920. Right, 100 years have passed, and we let it solidify in 1920, and just have continued to reinforce those structures that don't allow us to be all that innovative and think outside the box.
So we have that strong institutional conservatism, which clashes with our nature that pushes us just to be the forefront of new knowledge and change.
Right. Or we don't allow, I mean, there's lots of new knowledge being created, but those aren't the voices that are elevated, right? Like there's so much bureaucracy, and it takes all this time to get up, to become a big idea, right? Like that, sometimes they don't actually emerge, right? Despite the fact that they are happening, those ideas are happening on college campuses. So yeah, I think we got to rethink the structure. Yeah, it's sort of conservative, which is interesting you use that term because, some conservative folks think that universities are the pushers of liberal ideas, right? That we're the ones that are pushing the most liberal ideas. And, maybe that's the true in some cases, but, we all come from across the spectrum at colleges and universities. So we push all kinds of ideas, but we are the big thinkers, and we need to start being the ones that are able to think and push for new ideas.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Again, that's even more optimism and more inspiration. I love it.
I told you I'm an eternal optimist. I am.
Well, in that case, let me ask you to switch the gaze a little bit, and let's focus on higher education again, but in a kind of X-ray sense. What did these crises reveal about higher education? What was already baked in that conservative nature? What was there that now just becomes clear and evident for everybody thanks to COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter?
Yeah. Well, if anything, I mean, I think it goes back to what I was talking about, how we actually have the resources and the response has been so amazing to both of these things, right? That like, okay, we're gonna figure it out. We're gonna get through the pandemic. That's essential. Otherwise, we're gonna not continue to exist as colleges and universities. And then, we see Black Lives Matter, the racial uprising, right? That people have responded to that in important ways. I think what it reveals is that we can change, right? We can adapt, that we are adaptive, that organizations do change, even if it takes time, and even if we've been sort of committed to the same ideals. And I think it's not even, I think the ideals that colleges and universities are often committed to is elitism, right? And we're so connected to and so committed to those things that those sometimes prevent us from thinking outside the box and doing things and actually being committed to people of color, right? And to racial justice. Not that those things can totally coexist, right? Elitism and racial justice, yet they in many ways they come in tension, right? We see it's been a major tension in higher ed for quite some time. But I think what I have seen over the past 6 months or so is like we can adjust. We just have to want to, right? And until we want to, we're not going to. And so for whatever reason, the forces all came together at the right moment where people actually want to now.
They really have. And again, that's a really nice way of looking at this, that we did change really rapidly. We raced online in March in an incredible hurry. And now, as you say, we're leveling up from talking about racism to talking about anti-Blackness. So there's a lot of changes. Are there any structures that we should know about? I mean, I'm thinking in terms of the inequalities between institutions that you're talking about, or about how HSIs, Hispanic Serving Institutions, responded in ways differently than non-HSI institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I followed HSI's response to COVID-19 pretty closely, because obviously it's my area of research. So I wanted to know how are HSIs responding. I think what I saw was really, grassroots efforts, like on the ground, trying to figure out exactly what students need, right? Like, let's not, think really big and broad, like what do they need at a basic level? What do they need right at this moment, right? And so we saw at HSIs, we saw things popping up like parking lots with Wi-Fi, right? Like, okay, so students don't have access to Wi-Fi, right? Like, let's just give them access without, and also social distance at the same time, right? So you can drive up in your car and you can sit in your car and you can access your synchronous or asynchronous courses here in our parking lot, right? You don't have to come into the building. You can stay in the parking lot in your car, which HSIs have been doing that kind of stuff even around housing insecurities, right? And because I talk about cars, and that's a privilege, right? Whether or not you even have a car, but they've been responding in those sort of ways as well, right? Like, how do we support people who are housing insecure, right? Can we provide them with spaces to park their cars if they don't have anywhere else to go? And we're not going to kick them out. We're not going to have police, the university police come and tell them they have to leave at night. And so HSIs are responding to the direct needs of their students. I think one big thing was like the CARES Act, which HSIs did have, institutions had access to the CARES Act money, but HSIs got additional money because of their HSI status. And, a lot of the reports I've been seeing is like that they, or even just listening in on webinars and stuff, is that some of that money was slow to get to them, right? That they couldn't get to them quicker, that this money and this funding that they needed to be able to support students and to offer to students, that it just wasn't happening quick enough, right? That again, going back to the federal government and its response, that it was slow, right? It was a slow response. And so colleges and universities can only respond so fast when they're working with external entities that aren't responding quick enough, right? For their own needs, right? And for their students' own needs. So that's some of my thinking on it. Structural thinking.
That's fascinating. And thank you for showing us the HSI angle. John, did you want to jump in at this point and add anything?
Yeah, so Dr. Garcia, so as you're looking around and some of the things you talked about, where you're seeing schools dealing, first of all, a greater recognition of the inequities that exist in our system that have been kind of exposed. You're seeing how schools are dealing with them. Are you seeing things that you're seeing saying, well, when things come back to whatever the new normal is, here are some things what are the opportunities for things to continue to exist, things that can stay or should stay? I mean, it could be as simple as greater access to, mobile hotspots to give to students so that they still may have this issue. Are there other things and opportunities you're seeing to improve or reduce inequities and improve the kind of cultural identity things that you've written about?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the example you gave is a great example, when I was talking about the mobile hotspots, because I think we are responding to students in a way that it's actually addressing their needs. And we're seeing that happen, that it's like, what are the students' actual needs in order to get through this? Yet those could have been their needs all along, right? Who's to say that students didn't always need? So at my institution, again, well-resourced institution, I mean, they were providing laptops and hotspots to students, right? Like literally mailing them to students, right? Well, you need one? Here you go, right? Mailing it to them. Who's to say the student didn't need it prior to COVID-19? They just didn't know that they could ask, right? Or they didn't know, or maybe it wasn't available at the time. And then the university found ways to make it available. So I think we just, like it highlighted some of the inequities that students are experiencing, or the COVID-19 did. And then again, back to this idea that we responded very quickly. Colleges and universities have been able to respond very quickly. And so who's to say that that's not what we need to continue to do, right? Even the offering of courses online, now when I think about it, you know, had you asked me a year ago, I would have been like, I don't really want to teach online, right? Now I'm like, I could reach way more people, right? I could reach a lot more people this way, right? There's a lot more people that might be able to have access that wouldn't have been able to have access to me or my teaching, just because it's being offered online. And so I think there is, right? There is this focus on like, we can do a lot more. We just weren't really trying, maybe, I don't know. Or we were okay with the status quo, right? We were okay with what was going on. And this pandemic just sort of pushes into like, it's not okay, right? It's not okay. And there are lots of inequities, and we need to respond to them.
Oh, John, thank you for asking that, because Dr. Garcia, that's a tremendous answer. And one of the extra revelations that we got was these resource gaps, these inequalities among students. And as you just said, the fact that we were okay with it until COVID. Yeah, that's very, very important. Again, there's a kind of x-ray of where higher education is, and that really showed it clearly.
And to go along with the other, you know, the two topics that we're really talking about is we were okay with anti-Blackness and racism also, right? For the most part. Besides a couple of us on the ground saying like, hello, we should be talking about this, and it can't be diversity and inclusion talk anymore. Colleges and universities as structures, as systems, we're okay with that, right? And now all of a sudden, like, maybe it's not okay.
Good point. Diversity wasn't enough.
Diversity was not enough.
Well, let's shift ground to another angle, and this comes into the learning design technology program, really. Thinking about the profession of instructional designer. And with that, you know, people who do that kind of work in academic computing, instructional technology, but kind of instructional design field, that profession. What can that profession contribute to higher education as it navigates these two big challenges?
Yeah, I think many of us are leaning on on those folks right now, right? We're like, please help me. Like I said, I reached out to my folks and I was like, I need help. And they're like, tomorrow. And that's what we're doing. This literally was yesterday, and I'm meeting with them after this. And so we're leaning on them, right? To like, we need support in this. And I think that's where we also need to lean on when we think about this anti-racist work, is like, who are the people that are doing that work, that have been doing it, yet being intentional about not overburdening people, right? And accessing free labor, that like, we can't just be taking from people, that it should be a little bit more collaborative, right? When it comes to addressing some of these issues, because those of us that are less knowledgeable in certain areas, we have to recognize that the people that have the knowledge, you know, we can't just be asking them for free labor. We can't just be asking them to do free seminars, you know, every other week or whatever it may be, whether it be to teach us about how to better use technology, or to teach us about how to not be racist, right? Like that, those folks need to be compensated for their knowledge and expertise. Those are, if you do anti-racist work, or you do instructional technology work right now, you are top line, right? Like, you are top of the line, and we should be making sure we're compensating those people for helping us all be better about it. So yeah, I definitely think that, like, I'm leaning on those folks for sure. And I think we all need to, but be conscious of how much we're taking. Thank you.
That's really good advice. Well, then let me shift ground to a kind of related subject, which is scientific research. And as you said before, universities and colleges are at the forefront of ideas, and we're generating this. But at the same time, there's been this kind of boom in skepticism about the relevance of science. Everything from people thinking COVID is a hoax to not trusting medical advice, and so on. What does this skepticism tell us about how scientific research messages are crafted, or how we persuade people to pay attention to them?
Yeah. I think that was like a tough one. Like I question that every day. I'm like, I'm not really sure how science became not that relevant to people, right? And
Mm.
is it everybody or is it just really loud people, right? That like are just don't believe scientific facts anymore. Right? I feel like there's still a lot of us that actually believe in science and we believe in, and I've been saying that for a long time with the COVID-19, right? I'm like, the scientists are going to save us right now. It has to be, right? It's got to be public health people. It's got to be our scientists. It's like, that's who we need to rely on to get us through this. But there's a lot of skepticism out there and I'm not really sure how that happened. But I think there is an acceptance of being sort of not literate in science, and also to go along with that math, right, in general. Like it's like one of those things like, oh, I'm not good at math, right? Like even starting as a very young age, you're allowed to say like, I'm not good at math, and nobody questions that. Like, oh, well, me neither, right? Or I'm not very good at science, right? And so it's almost like we accept this lack of knowledge around things that matter. And so I think as a society, we've got to think, what do we value the most? What do we value here in the United States and beyond when it comes to how much we should know about facts, right? And how much we should buy into them. Because somehow we've gotten to this place where it's like, and I think social media somewhat has to do with it, right? Because you think whatever you see on social media is true, and we know that's not true. But people run with it, right? They run with false facts, right? Things that are not true in any sort of way, false realities, and are able to base all of their decision making on false realities. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and for folks like us who believe in science and social science, as a social scientist, to really think, like, gosh, how are we going to get more folks to actually believe, right, in this kind of work, and that it matters, that we have to have data in order to make decisions, because we need data to make decisions. So
I'm curious. So I'm coming back to your history of education, your history of higher education class. I mean, in the United States, we have the most educated population we've ever had in terms of, proportion of the population that's had post-secondary education.
right.
And yet the skepticism around science seems to persist or in fact increase. Are we doing something wrong in higher ed?
That's a good question. Well, yes, I think we are. Yes and no. So one thing is, I think there's this falseness. So American higher education, we want to say that we are the most accessible in the world, right? We have the most accessible, and we have enough institutions for that many people, right? Like we've got like some 5,000 post-secondary institutions, right? And they come and go so quickly, I don't even have the exact number, but thousands of post-secondary institution options in the country. Yet if we think about the majority of the population actually doesn't access. So yes, we have more college educated people today, but still a majority doesn't access higher education. We've got, last check, maybe like 19 million enrolled currently, right? And then a whole bunch of folks that aren't enrolled, not that they don't already have degrees, but I don't think that we're fully accessible still, right? We're still minimally accessible, and there's still so much emphasis, getting back to this idea of structural inequalities in colleges and universities, so focused often on just those top elite institutions, right? Even the affirmative action debate, I always have to remind my students, I'm like, okay, affirmative action, totally important debate. We've got to talk about it. I need you to understand it. Affirmative action affects a very small percentage. Yes, tiny little percentage, like the most elite public institutions and the Ivies, right? Like the most elite private institutions. Really, it's a very small percentage of colleges and universities that don't care. Most are pretty open. Most are pretty much accessible, right? We're pretty much broad access in this country, meaning you can find a place if you want to be there. And so we just focus so much on that. I think the other thing, as far as like science and our the way we're not maybe focusing so much on science, is we're constantly changing what our GE requirements are, and constantly rethinking what is the best curriculum for folks. And as we change that and constantly addressing that, I don't know, maybe we've allowed science to sort of fall by the wayside in ways that has affected us, even those that have college degrees. maybe we haven't been adequately trained in science either, because we can get around it. And I remember taking a class, a science class for non-science majors.
Right.
Not that it was a bad class. I enjoyed it. It was actually a chemistry class for non-science majors, right? But it was and it was very much more practical, right? I don't even want to say it was watered down. It was just like, here's how science works in real life, because it does. And here's some ways to think about it. But you know, we come up with ways like that to sort of get around, like, okay, here, it's science for non-science majors, meaning you can do it too, and you just got to take one class and you can get a degree. And so, you know, we could rethink, how are we, even as colleges and universities, valuing science and how much science the students have access to.
Oh, that's a great answer. Like physics for poets, right? No, thank you. That I hadn't thought about that, constant churn in general education. Well, this builds up to a kind of technical but really social question, which is about the digital divide, and you've touched on it before. You've earlier today you've talked about how you've had to ship out hotspots to different students who don't have them, and HSIs putting out Wi-Fi parking lots. I'm just wondering if you could speak more to that. What's the role of the digital divide and how academia responds to COVID and to the anti-racist movement?
Yeah. I mean, I think we knew that was my first question, very first question when we first started sort of seeing universities. I want to say Stanford was the first to like shut down back in March. It was definitely one of the Ivies, and it might have been Stanford. And it was California, right? Where once we saw California colleges and universities shutting down, it was only a matter of time, right? It's kind of like whatever California does, we're all going to follow. Of course, it's kind of like Harvard. If Harvard does it and California does it, you know, the rest of us are probably going to follow suit. And those places were doing it. They were shutting down, right? They were saying we are going online to slow the spread of COVID-19. And so I think that as soon as I saw that happening, my first question was like, well, what about people that don't have access to online, right? Like, how are we going to deliver instruction? Like, I need to understand more, right? Like and I knew immediately it was going to reveal inequities in pretty powerful ways. And so what we saw was an immediate like response of like, we got to survey everybody. It's like, you're getting all kind of surveys about, do you have access? And me as a parent, I got that too for my kids, right? Now what happened though was there was a slow response depending on what type of resources the institution had, right? And I will speak from personal terms as far as my kids. I saw it very slow. I mean, we went weeks, literally weeks, and I am in an urban school district, weeks with no instruction, because they were so busy trying to figure out how in the heck are we gonna, you know, our district is predominantly low income. Of course, you know, my kids, we're very privileged and we had the economic means, and I'm like, my kids have computers, we got Wi-Fi, we're ready to go. They're kids of a professor, of course they're ready to go, but a majority of the district was not. And so we saw weeks of no instruction, which is very frustrating as a parent, particularly as a professor. It's like, my kids are not getting any instruction because they're trying to figure out how to get you know, laptops and Wi-Fi to kids and students in colleges and universities. So so that I knew that was going to be an immediate, and most colleges and universities don't have the ability to send laptops and Wi-Fi to every single student. It's not a reality, right? We just can't like rely on that to be the response. So it has, I think, revealed some inequities for us. And I still think we're probably going to start to see more data come out on it, right? Like people are talking about the social scientists, right? That people are crunching those numbers right now, that we're going to probably start to see a lot more reports that will reveal a lot of those inequities that have come out over the last, I keep saying 6 months, but it hasn't even been 6 months since we've been in this pandemic, huh? I feel like it's been like 4 months. And so I think that we're going to continue to see a lot of that. It'll be interesting to see if people are, you know, attend in the fall. Our classes seem to be not hurting. I don't know how other universities are. But I think it'll be interesting, right, for us to see how many people continue to be enrolled in higher ed, despite the fact that they're unemployed. People are becoming unemployed, or they don't have access to technology, or whatever it may be. They're struggling to get those access. You know, it's still yet to be seen what happens.
Do you think, or what's the current status? Is Pitt going to be entirely open, mostly open this fall, entirely online, some kind of combination, or hasn't been revealed yet?
They are calling it the Pit Flex model. Like I said, I saw your post about high flex. I was like, I better tune in. So high flex obviously is the term, the trending term. So they're calling it Pit Flex. And yeah, we're saying we are going to be offering, flexible instruction. Although, a lot of us are saying we're not going to campus. We're not going to be flex. We're just going to be online. And I think that's what needs to happen. I think everybody's comfort level right now is different. And we need to allow people, both faculty and staff and students, decide whether or not they want to be physically present. And same with K through 12, right? And as a parent, I get to decide whether I want my kid to be present or not, but the schools have got to deliver. Colleges, universities, and schools have got to still deliver instruction. I can't have my kids sitting, or anybody who's enrolled in college, university, sitting with weeks of no instruction. And so we've got to be able to deliver online, even if we're in this high flex model. So that's where we're at, is like, we're going to be delivering all online with a little bit of in person.
Well, between PitFlex and an incredible range of topics, you've been an unbelievably generous interviewee. You have just covered so much that I envy your students. And again, I really do want to take one of these classes to soak that up. Is there anything, before we wrap up, is there any topic that you'd like to hit that we haven't yet covered? Is there any particular point about this great rethink of higher education that we should address that we haven't touched on yet?
Ooh, rethink of higher ed. There's so many ways to rethink it. No, I mean, nothing major, but I do think that we are entering another important time right now, as far as like an election coming up, right? And that we definitely should think about our roles in higher ed, in being active. If we're going to be active and doing anti-racist work, we've got to be active and doing, being politically engaged as well. And then making sure our students are, I've been talking a lot about what I'm calling liberatory outcomes, that like graduation rates aren't enough. That what are those liberatory outcomes? What are outcomes that show liberation, right? Particularly for minoritized groups, and civic engagement is one of them, right? Civic engagement is a value that colleges and universities have had historically, right? If I think about the history of higher ed, we've historically valued being engaged with communities, but it hasn't been necessarily for the sake of social movements or liberating minoritized folks. Right. And so I think we need to think about those liberatory outcomes, and how are they aligning with this move for more racial and social justice, right? That if we want civic engagement and civic outcomes in higher ed, which we always have, how do they tie in, right, to empowering and liberating minoritized groups, despite the fact that COVID is going on. So yeah, I'm still thinking a lot about liberation and liberatory outcomes, but I think higher ed we've got to think about how do we teach students about their own racial identity, right? Because some students have a lot of internalized depression, and it's not just race, it's a lot, you've got queer students who show up and are homophobic, right? How do we help liberate students by helping them grapple with who they are as people and how they show up, and help them to understand how to liberate, empowerment. We got to empower them to liberate themselves, right? It's not about altruistic work as universities and colleges. It's about empowering students to do it themselves. So yeah, thinking about liberatory outcomes. So stay tuned on more writing on that. I wrote a blog post about it I could share with you, but thinking a lot about college and universities' roles in that.
Well, that would be great. I'd love to see that blog post. But before we go, John and thank you. That was a great answer. My God. I mean, all these, I love liberatory outcomes for minoritized groups. And also the question of should higher ed be active in elections. John, you had a question you wanted to ask too.
I do, just in the same line of liberatory outcomes from minorities and marginalized groups. It seems like the movement that is upon us, there's momentum behind it. And as you talked about your high flex system, schools potentially going to more all online, how do you keep that momentum going? Because it seems like a lot of the movement is interpersonal. It's face-to-face, it's discussions, it's conversations, and a lot of that could be lost with a predominantly online presence in universities. And so, and some schools are we're going to bring back half the classes, second year and fourth year, first years only. Do you have any thoughts on how universities and colleges can keep that momentum going and that conversation going between students and within to affect the culture changes you've talked about and to recenter more groups into the college culture within an online type of construct?
Yeah. I mean, I think we are fortunate. I can't imagine what this, I know there was a pandemic, about 100 years ago, 1918, with flu, right? And I'm like, how the heck did they survive then? Because we are surviving because of Zoom, right? And other platforms such as Zoom. And that's why I think that we have the technology, right? And even, we think about Zoom, which we're on right now, they've responded, right? All of a sudden you've got, poll options, you've got breakout rooms, you can thumbs up, right? Like all this sort of stuff that immediately they're responding, right? I think we're seeing a response to figure out how do we still continue to engage? Although I think it looks different for different types of students. Like I teach graduate students and I'm like, graduate students I think can survive in an online environment. First year students, I worry a little bit more about first year students that we know the research shows us that first year is so vital. And part of that is that in-person interaction, right? Those bridge programs are vital for students, that they're able to be on campus prior to the start of the semester, particularly minoritized groups. A lot of times are the ones that go through bridge programs that they need that, right? They need that access to people. Residence life, I've been a resident advisor. We know the research that residence life is such a powerful place for students, right? And there can be liberatory outcomes based on just living on campus. And so I think it depends, right? I think some student populations, it's just going to be really hard to continue to do what we've always done, and others, it's fine, right? We can continue to do it. So I think it's stratified, and we're probably going to see that, right? It's affecting some people more than it is in others, depending on where you're at in life and in your educational trajectory.
John, thank you for that question, and Dr. Garcia, thank you for that answer. In fact, we're out of time. Thank you for all of your answers. This has been a fantastic interview. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.